Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for anybody who's been waiting and looking at for season 2, season 3. We've had quite a number of things obviously come up. Life happens, as it often does. We've been eagerly working away in the background, trying to make adjustments to some of the technical aspects of the first season. We believe that we've resolved all of those issues, at least we hope so. Please do keep feeding back to us, anybody who notices difficulties with the sound, etc. But again, we feel that we've kind of readjusted and tweaked certain aspects of that, and we hope it's now resolved. So thank you for that. So a little bit about season 2. There was meant to be, season 2 was really going to be about me reading excerpts, not or entire chapters rather, of Broken Roads, my book, and unpacking each of those chapters in a way in terms of just what was coming up, what was kind of involved in writing it, what kind of I was trying to communicate, what my hope was in terms of people who might receive it, read it, or encounter it, and also to kind of clarify a couple of things that I think I might not have communicated too well, maybe in the book, certainly through the podcast. I don't live my life necessarily in any significant manner, or let's say in a way that where I was once debilitated by my experiences, and I mean, literally could not live or function and operate in everyday life. And so my book straddles obviously the very early experiences of me as a child and all of those difficulties that I experienced, and my recovery journey, which I don't really like the word recovery, especially in the context of the connotation for me. And this is just me, I'm not attacking the word recovery. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that for me, it has a certain connotation that there was something to recover. For me, I was really talking about being able to overcome and really being able to reestablish a space for myself in the world, and my ability to function within relationships and to be able to move towards intimacy, as difficult as that has been. And also to talk about the ways in which society had been impacted by me and by the issues that I had been that I suffered from effectively. Being abused, being raped as a child, is not something that is easy to discuss, especially if it's something that you've never spoken about. For me, I'm a professional. I talk about these things. I've spent many, many years in therapy. I've spent many, many years with therapists and clinical teams working as a professional. I was also a person who's learned how to kind of take care of myself. But I had a lot, and I believe it was coming from the right place, from people, a compassionate place, who reached out to me as if I was still that kind of broken, enfeebled, and kind of, really affected kind of person. And I'm not saying that I haven't been, and that I'm not, and that the impacts of this, some of them will be there. I believe, at least for me. For the rest of my life, it's something that you learn to live with. It's something that you have to integrate. It's complicated. It's tough. It's not something that's straightforward by any stretch of the imagination. There's all sorts of confusion. There's all sorts of people who are kind of vying for attention, trying to tell you the ways to do it. And I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just giving you my account, my experience. I'm not saying that there aren't potentially better ways, or that there aren't different aspects of things that might have brought me, let's say, relief, or at least some comfort or some assurance earlier on in the process. I'm just giving you the journey, broken roads that led me here. Where is here? So here is my life as a professional, as a businessman, as a social entrepreneur, which is again, it's a made up word in many senses. However, it relates to some very kind of tangible kind of things that I do. I'm the Group Chief Executive Officer of Chrysalis Group Services. I run a number of companies. I work with an executive and non-executive team. My life couldn't be more different than it was growing up, but my life has been blighted and affected in many, many ways. Some people kind of thought, and I think through some of the podcasts and some of the comments that I have so overcome things that I'm completely away from some of those experiences. And I just want to reiterate, yes, that's true. The thing about life is that life is filled with many paradoxes. So things that contradict, that are true but are seemingly contradictory. That's for me what a paradox is. And you kind of, for me, not you, me, I kind of had to learn to be able to live with the insecurity of paradox, because paradox is not providing a concrete certainty. It's kind of saying that different things, different aspects of my experiences can be reconciled, but it be at different ends of one spectrum. I've experienced different forms of and effects of my addiction. I have a very kind of, let's say, personalized view. I'm in the process of writing a book about addiction. I've laughed and I've been a bit tongue-in-cheek to say it's probably a book about what Colin thinks, everything that Colin thinks about addiction and what he thinks it is. I'm trying to do this to be helpful. I'm not doing it to challenge the disease model necessarily, except where I feel that it needs to be challenged or it needs to be reconsidered. I'm also not doing this from the point of view of saying I have found the kind of the pluralistic and holistic totalitarian kind of solution that I've come up with, the unified theory of addiction. I don't think that. Someone else might. I doubt it very much. I'm just having a conversation. So the way in which I'm approaching this book is I'm just talking about everything that I hear that everybody says. I'm reconciling that with my own experiences. I'm pointing out some of those differences and some of those contradictions. I'm talking about when it's a paradox or when it's something that's almost metaphorical, where it's just language and the use of language is as a vehicle that's being used in order to get somebody help or in order to get somebody to try to understand experiences that have otherwise been confusing. I'm not a person who will ever settle with the answers that other people give me. I'm just not built that way. My experiences, my journey doesn't kind of permit me that privilege. And I don't think that personally, I think that we should all make our minds up. And that I think that many people, well-informed and well-intended, I would say, I can't say that's true for all, I'd say, let's be charitable and say that's the majority of them, are talking about the complex issues of mental health, childhood abuse, childhood trauma, recovery, the 12 steps, controlled harm minimization, controlled substance use, all the different forms of addiction, all of the different forms of mental health issues that people encounter. And they're trying to talk about these in a way that both helpful and understanding, but I think sometimes we overshoot. When I talk about these issues, I think these issues are really, really important. And I'm not saying that because I don't think other people don't think they're important. Clearly they do. I'm just using 30-odd years of experience and then all my previous life experience before to draw on that. I'm also using my professional and my limited academic experience. Right, I have postgraduate qualifications. I've studied academically. I obviously have a deep interest. I read extensively around the areas and the subjects that I'm affected by, that people who I come into contact are affected by. I find it incumbent upon me to educate myself, to know something. I'm not able to either support something or expressly communicate its effectiveness or even criticize it if I don't understand it. And that's really, really important. If I hear people saying stuff about certain approaches, but they don't really say, like they don't agree or it doesn't work. I hear things like the science and all of these kind of things, and these are words that if we ever use them, we should qualify them. We should qualify them by saying what we mean. If we're talking about an approach, if we're talking about academic study, if we're talking about research, if we're talking about some of the lates and greats or current kind of researchers in whatever space that is, like Freud and Jung and people like that, or the kind of existential philosophers. If we're talking about psychology, if we're talking about some of the current kind of psychology approaches, if we're talking about neuropsychology, if we're talking about brain imaging, if we're talking about the brain, we should qualify that. We should, and I always try to provide in my podcasts notes to where the research is from. I also really want to encourage us to develop together the ability to think for ourselves and the ability to critically analyze stuff. And to do that, we don't necessarily have to be academics. We just have to understand what's coming in at us, which comes in through social media at a rapid rate. So if you watch TikTok or you watch Instagram or you watch Facebook or you watch YouTube and you're watching shorts, and these are information overloads and they're coming at you. And some of them are so well choreographed. Some of them are so, and obviously AI's entered that space. It entered that space quite some time ago, but now it's really kind of saturating that space. And I kind of think with social media that if I can't cope or manage or process the amount of information coming in, then we should be really thinking about what we ingest, what we kind of, what we take in, because that's food for our minds, it's food for our soul, food for our spirit. It's emotionally charged. In a sense, content creators, whether they're aware of it or not, have been kind of, let's say, these things have been, these channels, these operating platforms, even the platform we use to communicate to you here, is kind of employing the dark arts of psychology, things that we do know about the ways in which we can capture people's attention, the ways that we can grab attention, the ways that we can create a bias, or we can deliver a particular ideology or a particular viewpoint, or how we can divide people's opinions in a sense, in terms of the controversial aspects of stuff. So we see that a lot. And in this world of social media, in this world where we live, and especially if we're in the West, and if we're not, we're somewhere else, we're still busy, and we're just kind of trying to survive, every day. And in that mode of fight, flight, survival responses, we often don't get the time to really slow down and really think about these things. So this podcast, in a sense, is just an opportunity to stop, to slow down, to have discussions, and to discuss. I talk about my faith. I talk about my Catholic faith, obviously. I'm a practicing Catholic. Now, what I mean by practicing Catholic, and there are many people out there who might want to disagree or help me try to understand a different definition, but in the Catholic faith, Catholic simply means universal. It means for everybody, yeah? So it's the universal Christian church. And I just want to say that in the Catholic Church, we are called to be Christian. We are called to be saints, rather, and to be Christ-like. And that's where the practicing bit comes in, because I'm a fairly new revert to my faith, on fire for my faith, on fire for the knowledge and the richness and the depth of its teachings, of the writings of the early church fathers. And I'm not saying I've extensively studied them. I've dipped into them. I've studied some. I have some that have appealed to me. I watch a lot. I've read a lot. I've studied some to some degree, at a kind of a postgraduate level. I'm not a theologian. I wouldn't take theological advice from me. If you want to, I talk about many people, and I have links of certain podcasts and certain resources where you can go and get these things. However, I like the word practicing Catholic because I'm practicing to be Christ-like. I never get there. I will never get there in this life. One of the things that's really important to a person like me who had a childhood like me, is that I'm sensitive to feeling that any parental role, so God as the Father, comes with all this power, all this judgment, all of this condemnatory kind of implicit kind of bias towards me. And if I'm not careful, I don't see the message of love. All I see is the message of hell and the message of punishment. Now, I'm not going to be a relativist. I'm not going to say, whatever you feel, you go with your gut, you do what you want to do. But I am going to say, examine truth, examine your truths, examine your feelings, because facts are facts, truth is truth. And sometimes our feelings comport to the truth, but sometimes they are so far away from the truth. So some simple examples of that is I can feel like I'm a bad person. Objectively, I might be. Objectively, I might not be. But my feelings might tell me that. I've suffered extensively with intrusive thoughts as a person, which I believe were fueled by the distortion of my own self-concept, the distortion of my own lack of centrality, the distortion or the erosion of any central focus of solidity of who I was as a person, lack of confidence, insecurity, and fear and anxiety, and driven by those things. And I think that we have to be careful that we don't become scrupulous. Scrupulous means feeling that our experience with Christ, our experience with God, is dependent on how we act. That literally, if we're experiencing depression, or if we're experiencing negative things happening in our life, or if we're suffering, or our loved ones are suffering, that God doesn't love us. Now, the truth is that God is love. God can't be anything but love. Now, it's a complicated subject, and I will point to places as we go, and I'll hopefully have some guests on who can talk more about that, or definitely point you to some resources. But, it is difficult. One of the things that caused me to turn away from faith, or to not look deeper into my faith, was the sense of being abandoned, that God was hidden, and that I couldn't experience God, I couldn't feel God in my life, or that I couldn't reconcile all the bad things that were happening in the world, the pain, the suffering, the children, the dying, the wars. And just like anybody else, I'm a human being that gets affected by these things. And of course, the place to go to is internally, to think about where this just doesn't seem to reconcile itself with love. And so lots of people, atheists, agnostics, people who say they've had their faith and then lost it or turned away from their faith because it doesn't answer, let's say, the most fundamental questions of why these things exist and how they don't seem to reconcile with God. One of the easiest things I can think of is me being abused and raped as a child, continuously being abandoned by my mum, never seeing my dad. I didn't do anything. I never asked to be born into the world. My take was, why is this stuff happening to me? And I learned as a child that I couldn't trust anybody. I learned as a young adult I had to survive. I learned all of these things. Now, I'm not saying that to justify some of the things that I went on to do as a young person. I'm saying that to explain some of the background. The judgment is God's, and of course some people will be sympathetic, some people will be judgmental, some people will be neutral, some people just won't care, and a whole variety of different things. However, what I do know, and again, Broken Roads leads me here, the kind of, if you like, the main title there really was Broken Roads Leads Me Here, which means here in my life today, which is a million trillion miles away from where it was. It doesn't lead me into a life of no problems. It doesn't lead me into a life of no suffering. It doesn't lead me into a life of, I have relative comfort. I have some choices that I can make today that I wasn't able to make in the past. I've worked extremely hard to be able to do that, but it certainly isn't part of the person who I was. And so I understand why people kind of turn away from the idea of God. And often one of the criticisms of people who turn to religion is that they want there to be meaning. They want meaning to exist. So atheists might say there is no guided hand behind the creation of the universe, behind the creation of human beings, behind the creation of our planet. It's all just random, unguided chaos that just happens to present itself with a semblance of orderly direction. But actually underneath, Richard Dawkins, I think, is the person who comes up with a quite a famous quote which kind of just encompasses that. He says it in a much more sophisticated, I suppose, a much more clarified way than me. And I get it. I do get it. I get why people with certain experiences, and I know that Richard Dawkins underplayed the fact that he was abused sexually in private school as a child. He said it was happening to everybody. And these are just the kind of lies and distortions that exist about the reality of abuse and the reality of dysfunction, the reality of evil, really, in the world, and also the reality of how powerfully people are impacted by that, whether they want to admit it, whether they want to affect it. And I'm not saying it's because they weren't loved that they don't love God. I'm saying that they have sound, what seems like rational, logical reasons. And the problem with faith, the problem for me, is that God is hidden. At the same time, he's visible. So it's a paradox, right? One of those things are seemingly contradictory, but actually objectively true, at least for me and for many Christians who might agree with that point. We are in a world that is broken. We're in a world that is fallen. We're not in a perfect world. That perfect world is yet to come. We don't exist in this place. We have souls that will live for eternity, as opposed to atheists who believe that, it depends whether you believe in the multiverse, or there's multiple Collins or multiple planets or multiple existences, that we live in the Matrix. There's all sorts of crazy ideas, or we just die. We just come to life. We search deeply for meaning. We really want to matter to people, and yet, in truth, it's just a delusion. We're just kind of, Richard Dawkins calls it the God delusion. But God for me isn't some random bearded ancient figure in the sky with strings and we're all kind of puppets. It's nothing like a person. God is outside of time and outside of space and outside of this creation. God is a created being. He is part of the consequence of setting, not part of the consequence, rather, sorry. He is the, as they say, the unmoved mover. He is the person, the sole creator of everything that exists in the universe. At least that's my belief, and that's many people's belief in this world. Could it all be untrue? Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to sit here and say that I might not have deluded myself, that I might not have, in my fear and in my trembling and in my anxiety and in my insecurity, looked for meaning in what otherwise felt like meaningless existence. And, that's true, because many, many times I sat and contemplated taking my own life just because life was so dark, it was so painful. I suffered from intrusive thoughts. I prayed to God. God didn't seem to take them away, didn't answer my prayer. That was another proof that God didn't exist. I would relive the trauma of what happened. I could feel in my bones, in my DNA, the effect of what happened to me as a child. I felt continually at odds with other people in the world. I felt entirely uncomfortable. I lacked complete confidence. I was completely critical all of the time of myself. And so in the deep, deep pain and the deep, deep suffering, the deep, deep loss and the deep, deep confusion, it seemed logical, if God didn't exist, to just take my life. I mean, if this was all random, it didn't mean anything, then it seemed like a logical step to just want to end the pain, end the suffering. If creation, if existence and being born, even although the infinitesimal randomness of me being born in the world at this time through the parents I had, and et cetera, are so infinitesimally small, that all of these numbers that keep being presented as these things that are basically impossible. So I'm intended. That's what I learned from my Christian faith. I was intentional. God intentionally brought me into this world. He brought all of us, every single one of us who's existed was intended by God. We're not accidents. In whatever way we come into this world, the reasons for that are a mystery. Faith is a mystery. That's the problem, is that I can talk to you about things that I see as metaphysical, things that I see that can't be explained by normal, conventional, naturalistic causes that perhaps are, we're kind of used to seeing. So if I have a thumb that's been blackened, but there's a hammer who's hit my thumb, then I have a reason for that cause. Or if it just suddenly turns black and I go to the doctor and he says, you've got this particular condition or this disorder, and that gives me a naturalistic explanation for it. But I have so many things in my life, and I've saw in other people's lives, that go beyond naturalistic interpretations, or at least things that are available. It doesn't mean that there isn't one. I'm not saying that I have absolute certainty, but one of those experiences was many years ago, 2021, May, where I had been going through an episode of drinking too much. I had 10 years of struggling with alcohol. Come to work, holding down my job, maintaining my family, not in a great way, not being necessarily emotionally available. I had my own struggles. I was struggling with my own mental health. I became very ill, and what later became the possibility of something terminal turned out to be something still quite serious, but not, at least at that point, terminal. But I prayed, because I had tried all of my own ways as a professional, as a person who would go to 12-step meetings, who would kind of walk the 12-step program, who would do all of these things, and yet I had struggled. For me, I'm a perfect example of falling down more than I was able to stand up, of crawling over the finish line because I didn't have the strength to get there. I'm not. My struggle was and can be still real. But when it came to this, one of the things that I prayed for was for God, Christ, to take this away from me. I hadn't yet reverted at that point. I hadn't yet completely given up, but I was very close. I felt abandoned by God. If God did exist, I had concluded that if there is a God, he doesn't like me. If I didn't like me, and if I didn't care about me, and I didn't really think that it was important whether I existed or not, then how much more would he not like me? How much more would he agree with that? And that made sense, right? Because I was suffering and I couldn't find an end no matter what I did to try. I managed to stop for a year, stop for 6 months, but it would obviously continue. We know these things, and some people say it's the progression of the disease of addiction, and it could be. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying that that's one explanation. However, I asked for God to remove from me what had been a lifetime of problems in one way or another with addiction. And the thing about addiction was that it was grounded on this sense of me being at great unease with myself. And so I could not sit inside my own skin. I was so uncomfortable with who I was. And I was also confused about who I was. I didn't know who I really was. My addiction would morph. The things that I would do to try and fix myself. Philip J. Flaws writes Addiction is Attachment Disorder. I think it's a great book. I don't think it has all the answers, but I think that for some people it might resonate. It certainly resonated deeply with me, and it stayed with me, as that addiction was an attempt at self-repair. And I like that more than recovery. So I was trying to basically fix myself, not in the sense of just avoid something, but literally to repair something. So something that was absent, that didn't exist, that I couldn't regulate my own emotions. I couldn't sit with uncomfortable emotions. I couldn't tolerate boredom. I couldn't tolerate a lot of different things. All the big feelings as well: fear, anxiety, dread, despair, but also the more mundane, the less, let's say, what I recognized as, not necessarily prominent, but they were significant in terms of creating this sense of disease in myself, this unease. And a lot of people talk about the disease of addiction as that kind of sense of dis-ease. Now, that might well be the case. I don't really want to be controversial, and I also want to I love the 12 steps. I love many of my friends from the 12 steps. I think it's a great movement. I think when done properly, and when kind of, and even when not done properly, even in its imperfection, it is a profound movement for good. And just like anything else, it can be affected and impacted by things that are not good. But there are also other ways in which people find a solution, or at least find some way through their own darkness and their own struggle with different types of addictions. And like I said, my addiction spanned the whole gambit of anything to a certain extent. So I wasn't deeply involved in some stuff, but some stuff was kind of there. There was always a kind of a grading of this was my preferred thing, and if I couldn't get that, I would do this, and if I couldn't get that, or if I cut this out. And it's very subtle. It can kind of sneak in without your awareness if you're not vigilant, if you're not kind of on top of things. But anyway, after all those years of being really tired and burnt out and finished, and I finally, in pain, I cried out to Christ. And the strangest thing, and it's not the only time that I've experienced, this is the only time I've experienced this, but there's many other things I've experienced throughout my life what I'd call miraculous. My need, desire for alcohol, for anything, was gone. It just disappeared, and literally instantaneous. It was like instantaneous recovery, instantaneous remission. It's not there. It hasn't come back. I don't think about it. I literally live my life entirely free from the thoughts, from any rumination. I don't have that. Before, in recovery, when I'd gone through the 12 steps, I had moments of peace and clarity and serenity and all of that, but there was always this chit-chatter in the background, this kind of constant kind of temptation, if you like, or this inclination, or this sense of me working myself up into a frenzy, and that I went. And there are many other occasions when I tried to take my life, when other things happened. And so I talk about those things in my book. I want to talk about that stuff with other people, but more profoundly, I want to thank people who have reached out to say to me, "Oh, I can help you." And I don't mean this to sound like I don't need help. But I'm not that person that dominates the majority of my book. The whole point was near the end of the book, and then what's being done in between and beyond that. It's meant to be a story of hope. It's meant to communicate how dark, how desperate, how bad, how messed up, how complicated, how painful life had become, and how painful and complicated and messy and sticky the journey out of that was, how it wasn't linear, how it wasn't straightforward, how it wasn't clear, how it didn't all come at once, how it wasn't instantaneous, and how it wasn't miraculous like the experience I just spoke about. And so how it was filled with many broken roads, how it was filled with progress forward and slips backwards, how it was met with falls and getting up and crawling and all of those kind of metaphors. And one of the things that I really like about my Catholic faith is that it describes life for me in a way that brings such clarity, and it answers so many questions, and it brings instant peace, a sense of, yeah, that all makes sense. All of my struggles, who I was, and perhaps I know that may not be the case for other people, or it may be the case for different reasons, or not. And I'm not saying, definitely not saying my experience is the same experience as everybody else. I'm putting my experience out there so that people can draw from it anything that's of use. If any of it feels weird, or it's unrelatable, or you just don't think that it applies to you, or you don't recognize that, or it doesn't make any sense, then reject it. I didn't put it out there because I need you to accept it. I need people to kind of applaud it, or I need people to recognize it in any particular way. If it is of value, then I'm deeply grateful. I'm grateful to God. I'm grateful that I had the ability to work with some great people to bring it to you. If the podcast likewise does the same thing, then I'm also equally grateful for that. I don't think that I have anything remotely, profoundly unique in terms of what I'm saying. What I'm saying, though, is what I do think is unique is that the way in which I want to communicate this. So I want to go against, if you like, the kind of the sexy undertones, because kind of like trauma can be, it can be kind of upmarketed, abuse and addiction and kind of recovery, and it's all kind of, and it's yeah, and it's all kind of look at me, and I find that both great if it works and it gets you from one place to another. However, I've worked with thousands, if not tens of thousands of people over a long period of time, both and directly, indirectly, and I know that it doesn't work like that. Often, behind the bravado, behind the excitement, behind is still deep pain. You just don't instantly recover. It doesn't work like that. At least it doesn't work like that for most people. And then comes the shame and the inadequacy that you don't quite measure up, that because you don't match the outsides of other people. It's a great saying, don't compare your insides to people's outsides. People want to talk a good show. And I'm not saying that they're not genuine, it's not real, or I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that in my experience, I sat across a table or across chairs from people who on the outside appear to have everything together, just as I did. And you would look at them and you would think, they're doing really well, they've cut, but inside they had deep pain, deep shame, deep anxiety, many, many things that were causing great kind of conflict and concern, and they didn't want to talk about it. They could talk about it with me, they could talk about it in a safe place, but when they went out into the world, they felt that they had to put their mask back up, which is, of course, a good thing to do. Protect yourself. Taking that rawness out into the world isn't often a good idea. However, it's important to notice that vulnerability needs attended to, and that it's important to also notice that there isn't a unified, single way in which we, as human beings, begin to find healing or begin to find the ability to take a stake in our lives and a stake in the world. And that it's really super important for us to be able to recognize that many, many people are broken. Many, many people feel disconnected. Many, many people feel shame. Many, many people feel uncomfortable in their bodies. And many, many people are just not talking about this. And many, many people have found different ways of kind of defending the world, defending themselves from the world and the expectations and the ideas that the world presents to them. And they'll do that through exercise, through bodybuilding, through achievement, through work, through a multitude of different things, in order to kind of like put people off the scent that there's a really broken part of them. There's parts of them that are really hurting, really suffering in silence. And so the next part of my book, which is for adults who live each day in darkness, and it could be for young people as well, persons. That's the bit of the book that I want people to focus on. Not for me, but for people who still live their lives each day in darkness. I was so ashamed each time I fell, each time I relapsed, each time I slipped, each time I drank, each time I gave into my sexual urges that I knew were disordered. And each time that I, kind of didn't live up to my own promises, each time that I did things that I was ashamed of, each time that I kind of participated and fell short, I just found reasons to continually beat myself up. And so when I found my faith, it was really important to me to really understand the message of love, to really understand, first of all, acceptance. God's love is available to me whether I'm able to receive it or not. That's the point. It's unconditional. It's not that God doesn't want us to do better or to achieve more in the sense of being great. He's made all of us for greatness. He's made us to set the world on fire, and I don't mean that literally as in a fire, but I mean to trailblaze through the world and make a difference with who we are in the world. And when that is suppressed, or when that's not recognized, or when that's not accepted, then we fall short. And God has made us for greatness. Only through Him are we made for greatness, only by following the law of God. Not in the sense of being afraid. They say that, fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. However, not in the sense if you're a scrupulous individual who's anxious, who sees God as somebody who's punished you, doesn't like you. There's a long journey of repair, and God is ready to be able to walk with you on that journey. And you may fall many, many times before you actually see yourself as a person who's worthy of being able to receive that love. God can't be anything but love. The greatest sin, or the unpardonable sin, is my understanding, again, not a theologian, is that, some people postulate, and it's a postulation, no one knows for certain, at least I don't know of this, that Judas, for example, who betrayed Jesus, is in hell. And the reason he's in hell is because he was too proud to ask for forgiveness, that his pride wouldn't let him, that he felt that he had committed the unpardonable sin. And I don't know if that's true. Many people will say, yeah, it's absolutely true. You can't prove that to me. However, it kind of would make sense that the only way that God's love is not able to be received is because we see ourselves entirely unworthy of it. And so if we accept that the world has broken us in different ways, and in ways that we don't even understand, and to depths that we haven't even yet understood, and yet we live that out, then we can understand that there's a real problem here. And so the journey for me was my journey towards understanding that God is love, understanding that God is real, understanding that there are objective truths that are objectively true, regardless of how I feel about those things. And so the podcast and many other things I do in my book is about that. It is about that journey, that confusion, and it is about that kind of one of my arrival points. It's still going on. The book is still being written. I live that book. My journey, those broken roads. I am free of so many things, and I am grateful to God for being able to give me the strength that I didn't have, for being able to help me find the way through that I didn't ever believe existed or was possible. And so in season 2 and in season 3, we've got some guests on who might hold contradictory views to me, or might be a bit revelationary, or they might be controversial. But I'm also going to be going through my book, as I said, chapter by chapter, and I'm just going to be having a monologue with you guys. And so one of the things that I am interested in is, because season 1 got off to a great start, still haven't got a lot of followers. That's okay. I'm seeing the numbers of views going up slowly. They're trickling up the way. They're in the high 10s, 60s, 70s. Some are in 100 to 300s. Some are a bit higher. But I believe we're getting there. And people are listening. What people are not doing that much, though, is commenting. People are reading my book. I know that because I get my statement of how many people in different formats in different parts of the world are buying my book, reading my book. So I know that it's still a very small exposure, but again, please, it helps other people. Doesn't, for me, it's a deep, I'm deeply grateful. I can live without people reading my book, and I can live without people watching my podcast. I don't need those things to happen, but I'd really appreciate if people commented or if people left reviews. What I'm really interested is, do you know people who might want to come on the podcast? Do you know people who might want to come on or interview me? Do you know people who you would suggest that came on the podcast? Or do you want me to discuss any topics and or have on any other professionals from my network to discuss things that are current at the moment or things that have affected you? Would you be interested, for example, in some live events? At the moment, we don't seem to really have the covering for it in terms of how many people watch what we're doing. But is that something that would be of interest? What if I had a closed event, for example, of people who experience some of these things and who might want to have not a professional kind of group, but just a forum whereby somebody like myself, who is a professional, who've come through these experiences, where you can just be received, where you can just perhaps kind of come. Is that something that might be of interest? Would you be interested in other types of forums? So a kind of a live ask me anything type thing, where I promise I'll do my best to be courageous and brave enough to to kind of answer as kind of humbly and as gratuitous, and as honest and as authentic as I can. But I'm really looking forward to season 2, season 3. You guys are ultimately the people who will determine whether I continue to provide or produce these podcasts in collaboration with whoever is available on whatever topics, or not. So if that's also the case, and over time the numbers don't grow and we don't get that input and we don't get that engagement, then it's pretty much game over, but not in a sad way. Game over in the sense of it's out there. We've done what we could. We reach a natural kind of atrophy, and we'll kind of be where we are. There are people out there doing content. For example, there's Billy Moore. He's the All or Nothing podcast. I watch his podcast. I knew Billy many years ago. We haven't been in contact for many years. I'm aware of his story. A Prayer Before Dawn is an awesome novel and an awesome movie. It's very touching, very heart-rending, and very kind of survivor-focused, resilient. And I know that he does a lot of kind of engagement, live engagement out there on the streets, bringing to the world one side of how things exist in the here and now. I'm a very different type of creator, and sometimes I worry for Billy's safety. I worry for him and his young family, and I would love to be able to kind of chat with people like Billy. So if you have any details of Billy, then please put us in touch with Billy. I'd love if he wanted to come on to the podcast to kind of discuss things and to touch base and catch up with where he's been in his life. He's been through so many trials, and he's overcome all of them, and I have great admiration, obviously, and great respect, and he's a great following and great popularity. He's hitting a very popular note with people, and so there's that. If there's any other type of creators out there that you think it might be good to be in contact, or you yourself are a creator, or you're just starting out, and you want to kind of come and have a conversation, a chat, then I'd be really grateful and enthusiastic to get in touch. So we're going to link an email at in the bottom of the screen, and this is how you can contact us. So please do reach out. Please do like if you like this. Don't, obviously, if you don't. And do comment, please. And if you've read the book or you can leave a review, that would be great. It gets it up the, if you like, the rankings, and that means that more people can get to find out about it. Even if there's things that you don't like about the book, or you don't like about some of the things that I've said, or you don't like about as long as it's delivered. And I'm not saying you have to pretty it up and I won't listen to it, but I'm just saying I'm a person with a heart. I have feelings. And so just as I want to be charitable and I want to be respectful, then I'm just hoping that you understand that that's what I would expect as a minimum in return. I'm not saying it has to be pretty. I'm not saying that you have to agree. I'm just saying if you disagree, then tell me why. Try to be specific and be open if I'm able to reach out to you to come and have a conversation with me. So there's lots of things going on. There's still going to be a bit of a gap before we get any production out, but we're going to kind of start and get the ball rolling. I wish you all well. Thank you so much. Again, I'm Colin Mackell. This is Broken Roads, and I'll see you all soon.